Yes, the recording is started.
Okay, then once again, hello to everybody who's joining that OPC router training about connecting OPC router or connecting systems to databases or to database systems using OPC router. As said, with me is my colleague Jan today, who will do the training. And my name is Thorsten Weiler. I'm heading sales and marketing of Inray. And just before we begin, before we start, the information that this session will be recorded. So if you don't like to be on a recorded session, you still have the opportunity to leave the session now. Otherwise, the session, the advantage now is, of course, that the recorded session can be reviewed. So if you would like to review the session or share it with your colleagues who were not able to participate, just send us an email to sales@inray.de or connect with one of our international distributors on our OPC router website. And you will find your local distributor there. Connect these guys and they will be happy also to share the link for the download of the webinar with you. During the webinar now, we will keep all microphones muted just to avoid echoes and noises. And it would be great if you all would could turn off your cameras so that we have enough performance to stream the webinar training. And before we begin with the training, I know that we usually have several people who haven't heard of OPC router before. So just for these guys, we will do very few minutes about an introduction of what OPC router is, and then we will directly jump into the training. So to not waste any more time, so what is OPC router and what OPC router does? The name OPC router might be a bit confusing to some people because they might think that OPC router is a hardware solution which only can connect via OPC. So what OPC router really is it's a software-based solution which can be installed on a PC or on a server machine and can connect to any kind of system. So it's offering more than 40 different kinds of protocols to connect to any kind of shop floor system or IT system, and it not necessarily needs OPC for communication. So it also could be, for example, that there is an SAP system which directly is connected to printers or an email system which is connected to clouds or whatever. So you can use it. You can use OPC router in multiple ways for multiple processes which can run in parallel at the same time. And of course, there are some arguments and some typical sales and marketing arguments about the added value of OPC router. But for me, there are two main arguments that make OPC router pretty unique from my perspective. The first is the ease of use, because OPC router is offering a graphical user interface which enables everybody to create connections between different systems just via drag and drop. So you don't need to be an automation expert. You don't need to understand OPC. You don't need to be an IT or SAP expert to connect those systems. You will be able, after that training today, also to really connect your system, whatever it may be, with a database, just via drag and drop by clicking with your mouse. So that makes OPC router pretty unique. And yeah, the operational simplicity, I think, is really standing out of OPC router and differentiating the solution from other competitive products maybe. And also another very important differentiator is the amount of available plugins. So OPC router is not only supporting 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of systems or protocols, it's supporting more than 40 protocols already, which enables you to connect almost any system, no matter if it's an ERP solution or a cloud system or a controller, PLC, a printer, RFID system, barcode reader, whatever. So as said, today we will mainly focus on connecting two database systems. For OPC Router, there is a database suite where you can get almost all database plugins within one license. But there are also some special databases like SAP HANA, for example, and some native drivers for example, Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, Oracle, and also NoSQL databases like InfluxDB and MongoDB. And this is exactly what Jan will talk about and show you right now in his training session about how OPC Router can help you to easily connect database systems. So Jan, thank you very much in advance, and the stage is yours.
All right, thank you, Thorsten. Yeah, first of all, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We will directly start. I will just share my screen now. So everybody should be able to see it now.
I do.
Very good. So yeah, as always, we start with our OPC router configuration. Just for those who haven't seen OPC router yet, small general introduction. The configuration is basically divided into different sections. You have on the very left side the icons here, or the menus points that you use in order to operate the configuration of OPC router. Here in this plugin section, you see all systems that you can connect. This middle section is the workbench where you type in data, where you administrate your systems and build connections to actually transfer data. And you build connections using the transfer object on the right side. So that's what OPC router looks like when you start it. And we will go through all these steps and create connections now. First of all, there's a top menu here where you have also some options. For example, you can export a whole project here and then import it on another system. Everything is stored, so the whole configuration as well as the connections are stored in a local DB that is installed upon installation of OPC router. You have settings, general settings. Basically, you can just start using OPC router, but you may want to change the storage time here, particularly when it's a debug system. So otherwise, each transfer is stored with the respective values for analysis. So maybe you can change the time period here, or time span, as well as the size of the log files, depending on your editor. But generally, you can start with the settings as is. So next option here on the settings is interesting. So just when you actually have connections created and you have critical connections that you want to get informed if there's an error, you can just mark a connection and then tell OPC router to send an email once there occur an error during the execution of that connection. So that's a helpful feature here. The certificate storage, that's where this certificate storage of OPC router. We can use both this one and Windows certificate storage. And finally, the redundancy settings. If you run OPC router in redundancy mode, then you have two installations on different machines. They're communicating with each other. Once the slave is sending information to the master, once the master isn't replying in a defined period of time, then the slave would assume that the master is down and started its own service. So there's some sort of redundancy. Finally, further, you have the manual information and this point information where you can, and you may want to do that, mark this option, show transfer steps. So this will give you the execution order of a connection, which we will see later. In case something went wrong and your configuration or the runtime isn't working anymore, you can always go here, say, I'm an expert, Then you get another option here, file, which is database settings. And then you can just delete everything. So go back to 0 and then maybe re-import your project. So that this could be a nice option, especially on a testing system. So that's the general options you have. When you're working with OPC router, you work with these options on the left side here. It starts with the plugins. That gives you an overview about all the possible communications you have, systems that you can connect to. We will look at MS SQL. So when talking about database systems today, then we will have an example for the traditional relational database system using Microsoft SQL Server. There are different others here. And then non-SQL databases. So there's a time series database called Influx for time series data in large amounts, and a document-oriented database, MongoDB. That's what's supported by OPC router so far. So we will look at Influx and Microsoft SQL Server. Yeah, it starts when you want to use a plugin connector system. You have to tell OPC router the connection details. So when I want to get data from or write data to an OPC server, in this case OPC UA Protocol, I double click on this plugin and then there's a tab opening here. So everything is organized in tabs. So far I'm running only one OPC server on my machine. It's a CAP server, EX. When I double click it, there's a dialog coming up. You would supply an endpoint URL, define if anonymous logon is possible to the OPC server, and the encryption settings that you specified on server side. That's basically it. Of course, sample rate, we define that you can have multiple plugins and connections in OPC router to the same server with different sample rates, for example. And then finally you say check connection. And then at some point gives you the connection established message. And when I want to transfer data to a database, same procedure, I double click, a new tab opens, I get a list of all databases that I configured so far. Here I'm using another one, the training DB. So I give it a working name that is that you use throughout OPC router when creating connection. This should be a descriptive name. Then you give it a host or IP. You specify the database and the authentication method. So yeah, in this case I'm using Windows authentication. And here's a connection established message as well. So now I configure two systems that I can use, and that would be the next step. We create connections either using our template instance mode, where you can create, let's say, hundreds of thousands of connections for mass data storage, or a regular one where you manually create connections one by one using this option here, connections. So there you can create a folder here. I would just call it webinar to give it some structure. And within folders, you can either create connections here or by right click and say new connection. Then a new connection is created here. You give it a name. So first of all, I want to read data from an OPC server and transfer it to a Microsoft SQL server. So this is basically OPC to database, MS SQL. So once I've done that, another tab opens, and here in this workbench is where you create your connection. You can, when reading from an OPC server, you can use the transfer object OPC Data Access for reading and writing data to an OPC server. So all the the icons here are called transfer objects. That is also possible to do that, but in this case, I will show you the way how we usually collect data when putting them to a database. So we usually use an OPC trigger that is called data change or multi-data change. This is working by subscription. So I drag it over here into my connection. I double click it, and then a dialog comes up. So I have to tell OPC router which OPC server to use, and then the item. So I'm browsing the OPC server now. I'm running the simulation examples of CAP server X and choose the ramp function. Data change is, first of all, working by subscription and has another option. Other than the OPC Data Access, you can define some trigger options. For example, only trigger if the value changes by an absolute difference or by a percentage. Or, for example, you can specify a time of a delay. So maybe here I say wait 10 seconds, just to show you the possibilities. And finally, you have this checkbox down here, which says metadata output. So I do not only get the value of the OPC item, but also some additional information. So I get the value, first of all, of course, then the quality ID as an integer value, and then the quality string, which is the bad good quality connection between OPC client and server, and a datetime, a timestamp, and the name of an item. So some more information that could be helpful. That's why I'm showing it. The other one would only be the value if I go up to transfer object OPC Data Access. Since I want to insert it into a database, I choose database here. And double click it. So here I have to say, okay, I'm using the training database, that's correct, and then the database method. So you can select data, update, delete, or insert, and use stored procedures. First of all, I'm choosing an insert. Then you specify the view or the table, that is process values that I prepared. And then you have the columns here. So I will have the config ID, item name, timestamp, quality, and value. And there's no validation. So when I say OK, then it gives me as input parameters the columns of the table. And now I have to connect the fields. So I choose the value from over here. And just put it over here. The quality ID is the quality. Timestamp and item name. Config ID is just an integer that uniquely defines the row of the database table. So for this purpose, for example, we use constants. So I put just a random number here. And then put it over here. So now I have three objects. First one is a trigger, as well as giving me back one value with some properties. Then the database transfer object and a constant value. And you see here the numbers is the order in which it's executed. So if I deactivate the show transfer steps, they are gone. So in the beginning of for bigger connections, larger connections, it's always helpful to check this functionality. That would be the first example. So the next step is, this is just a configuration. It's running as a Windows application in the user context. If you activate it, you can just go up here or do it on the left hand here. And then either go productive or go productive here again. And now this connection is passed over to the runtime. So OPC router has the configuration as a Windows application and the OPC router runtime running as a Windows service that executes connections. And at some point it's restarted and we can switch to the state. So here, this is it's a view on the OPC router runtime service. It gives you an overview if the connection is working properly or if you made any mistake. So at the moment, I am having trouble regarding the database performance. As soon as I close the management studio, it will go faster. So yeah, this is due to the notebook I'm using. Right. So while we're waiting, I will just show you for the everyday work with OPC router one option that our project developers use a lot, and that is check quickly if there are some values coming in. So my table should be filled with data now. So I copy it. Yeah, so this one isn't running yet. So, but first of all, since this is working now, I will just go ahead and show you the stored procedure that I want to use next. So usually right now, I'm just doing an insert to the table. But what you can also do is you define or program stored procedures. Yeah, well, this is running. So quickly, if Yeah, well, I don't think that's gonna work. So procedure. I will, since I can't copy a whole connection here, I will quickly choose this one. So paste. So instead of an insert, we can use store procedure, which is compiled on database side. So it's a better performance, and you can add logic to your transfer. So I choose the store procedure, and it gives me the parameters in return. So I want a value, quality, timestamp, basically everything but the return value. So then I say OK. And now I can connect the parameters the same way I did it before with the insert and item name and config ID. So in this case, as you know, it's opened here. You have the store procedure with input parameters we saw on the OPC router, but also some programming. You can give back an error with the respective severity level to the OPC router, so then the connection breaks, for example, and yeah. This is something that our project developer do a lot. So we see if there's coming data here. So I will then use the store procedure example. And activate it. Yes. Okay. Okay, so now we'll just close this. Yeah, and at some point it will insert data into the database, but we're not waiting for that. We'll see if it works later. So the next step that is very nice to use is the file operations using an OPC router. So you can have network or local file access, reading, writing here, deleting. First of all, I would like to show you the CSV document. So you can just drag it here. Then the database can do whatever it wants. And I can configure the CSV document. So from the values I have here, I can say, okay, I have a delimiter. I have no header in this case, just as a data buffer. Decimal sign here and the date format. And then you just define the columns. For example, value, give it a data type. That would be double. Item name. Or maybe I can do it this way. An item name. This is of type string. And quality, which is the string as well. So that would be the CSV columns. So okay. I can also use up here. This is some automatic connections creation. So I check it and then I point value to value, and the other connections are made automatically by OPC Router. So now I have a document here, and I can use the file write method or transfer object. So when I double click it, I give it a path. So I'm doing it here on my local machine. So C temp and webinar. And I just overwrite. And the file name is process data.csv. Then I say OK, and I can assign the document to the file content. This is one way. We also support XML using XPath, or very often used in many ways is the JavaScript object notation. So you can either read or write JSONs. In this case, for example, I want to write one. So I put it here. And this is also nice because it's an editor that in the background creates a JSON. So you can either go here in the edit mode and program it yourself, or just paste in the JSON that you're supposed to work with. Or you use the assistant here. For example, I can say value, define a type, and item name, which is also value then, and quality. And in the background, OPC Router creates the JSON. One object, 3 values in this case. So since you not always want to use everything from a JSON, you define which nodes you need. In this case, I choose all 3 of them and say OK. So now I assign the values again. And I take the quality string. And as a result, I have a JSON document. So I put a file write to the content. And now you see it's more easy to have the transfer steps here to see in which sequence or which order it's executed. So that should be okay now. And now I try it again. I select the service in this case. So should be fine now without the management studio.
In the meantime, we have a question in the chat. There's a project. I had a more complex select statement using 2 joins. Problem is that the user interface only allows a select on 1 table. Is it possible to add a more complex statement manually? I cannot change the database to add a stored procedure.
Well, one way, one option was already set. You program a stored procedure that has a result set, or you create a view. But either way, you need to have access to the database system. Otherwise, there's no possibility to do it.
Okay. Yeah, that's exactly his question, I think, because he's not able to use stored procedures and also not able to create a view.
That's a problem.
Okay.
Well, actually, you can use a script, add a C# database connector, and then query the database. But that would be really a workaround, not something I would suggest. But yeah, I'm afraid you need to have access to the database. So except for scripting, there's no way. Yeah. So actually, I do need some data here. I can't show you the table, but the data is transferred. So the store procedure is running, and we have data in our table now. And there's 2 files written to my local hard drive. Open my webinar folder. Okay, or at least one. The process data CSV. Oh, I forgot to change the data file name. I think that should be JSON. The suffix. So, but now I'm writing 2 files and have the data in the database using a stored procedure. Yeah, exactly. So now that we have it, here the execution. If you mark one, then you have the data that was transferred at that point of time. You can go back to live mode here. You can zoom in and change the time that you're looking at, and you can export all the data. So when I go here, it would read all the data in that time frame here, and then you can export it to Excel or CSV. So the status is an overview about the current status of the OPC router service. So now we have enough data in the database. When I go back here to connections, I want to, let's say, transfer that to Influx. And the Influx plugin is, you don't have to do a lot here. You just specify the host and the port and the database. So I created a database called Inray, and within that database you can create measurements, so collection of data. So, but in the plugin you just define the database. So I have here in my command shell, I can, for example, say use Inray, and then Influx tells me, okay, I'm using the database Inray, and then you would just for debugging show measurements. It was written, I guess, like this. So there are no measurements. When you create a connection and it first times executes a query against Influx, then Influx would automatically generate that measurement. So we will do that now. Go here to webinar, say new connection, and I call it Influx. So I'm in this case choosing data from a database. So I choose select here, my process values tables. Okay. Process values. And I want to have the config ID, item name, and value, for example. Then I create a filter, and I'm looking at the transfer flag. So all data where the transfer flag is 0, the column, shall be translated to Influx and then marked as either transferred with a 1 or not transferred with a 2, transfer error. So I changed the column transfer flag and put one of these values. When there is nothing to transfer, just don't do anything. And in this case, I limit it to 1. You can also have a batch insert, but I put it to 1 here. This case, I just say time triggered every 3 seconds. Yeah, and then finally you can choose the InfluxDB. You can only do inserts with it. And here you define the database basically. We are using Inray. The measurements, there are no yet, so otherwise you can just choose them here. But I will now say oven. Timestamp is done by influx, and if there's a null value from the SQL statement, then it shall throw an error. And my tag keys, for example, is production location and item, 2 tags. You can have as many tags as you want, and a key. And I want to have the oven temperature. Can be multiple keys, for example, can also be pressures or whatever, any sensor values. This is basically the index from relational database system. You have a where statement, and this is defining the values that you're actually storing here using field keys. And there can be as many as you want. So that's basically it. The measurement that will be created is oven. I have 2 tags, descriptive tags. So item would be this, for example. Location is, well, choose a constant. This is then Hamburg. And then the value itself that goes to the field. So that would be one example for influx. So I say activate, go productive. And since I went into the plugins, it wants a restart. And then I'm going to switch to the status. Yeah, well, okay, while we are waiting, well, let me just try to restart the service. Okay, so I will prepare next step while we're waiting. So last thing I want to show you is our email plugin. When sending email, you have to define an email server, first of all. When you open it here, I'm using our company account with my personal email address. When I go to connections, I can just say new connection, email. And yeah, then you can choose the transfer object email. And then the one you were using, you can specify a number of recipients, can be basically as many as you want, I guess. Then I'm just sending it from my own email address. I have a subject. And I can have one or multiple attachments. Text should be as HTML. And I write the content here. So hello, this is an email from, and then you can have placeholders here. So this would be this, and you can use them in the subject or in the message, either by the buttons down here, or just double click it. And then you have a text, attachment, and recipients, one or more. When you have more than one recipient, you can also check this box, then everybody gets its own email. And that's not one email for all of them, but yeah, they think they're the only recipient then. So that's basically it. You say OK, and then you use whatever data from any source. You can combine sources and I'm sending it to myself, for example, and I will put here the path to the attachment, and finally the placeholder. So that's the recipient, my attachment, and the text. Just for debugging, I don't want to put a trigger here, but just activate it. And then go productive and trigger it manually. If it works. So yeah, now we have to wait. Seems to be some problem with the installation, so I don't know if it's going to work. Quickly try to stop. Maybe we can get to see it if I stop the service and restart everything. Now it is. I don't think this is going to work. There seems to be a problem with the new installation here. So, but you get the idea. We transfer the data here one by one to Influx, and email would just send an email with an attachment. So I think, yeah, that would be all of it. I don't think we get it running, so we could go on with the question and answers part, Thorsten, and that would be it.
Okay, thanks, Jan. For now, there are no new questions in the chat. So maybe we can give it another few seconds. Meanwhile, I can share my slides again.
Yeah.
For the last 2 slides. So if there are no questions at the moment, I just wanted to remind you of the upcoming webinars. So today, September 17th, we had the training regarding the database connections, and next week, next Thursday, we will have a special webinar training about Siemens connectivity with OPC router. So how to connect, for example, S7 1200 and 1500 via OPC, how to connect to Siemens MindSphere cloud system, RFID systems from Siemens, and also CNC machines from Siemens. And then in October, we will have another OPC router basic training. So for all basic features and basic usage of OPC routers. And in November and December, we will speak about scripting and a special training about how to use the email and the Telegram plugin. So this is what we are planning for this year. And as there are no additional questions from our side, thank you very much to all. As said, that webinar is recorded, so please just send us an email to sales@inray.de or visit our website and find your local distributor and ask them for the webinar link, and they will also be happy to share the download link with you. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for your time, and yeah, have a good time, have a good day, a good evening, stay healthy, and hope to speak to you soon next week. Bye everybody.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Indiana, I think we can